Let's now imagine a fun scenario. Let's say that you have this motion graphics gig come your way, and it doesn't have to be something that's really specific. Instead, whoever's commissioning you for this work, they just have a general direction in mind. So you might get, let's say, this sphere right here. And this is your general direction. They don't want this exact sphere, but they want something like this. And it's up to you to come up with something that's interesting and cool and abstract so that it can look something similar to this, but not identical. Well, in that scenario, noises are going to be your best friend. And this is where noises get really fun because they can become a tool for artistic expression. Most of the time, there's some kind of client demands that prevents you from making all of the creative decisions that you would want to make. But in these general circumstances, it's really awesome because it gives you the space to experiment with different patterns and come up with something that's really interesting and cool looking. This next part really has no rules. The only thing we're going to do is see if we can modulate the noise and make some weird patterns just by playing around with the settings. Also, for this next section, don't worry about following along with what I do. It's a very experimental way of teaching where I'm going to just live demo a random sphere. I have no plan ahead of time. I'm just improvising, and based off of ideas that I have, I'll just try to bring you through my mind as I'm going through the process. It's not as fun to watch as it is to actually be playing with these ideas yourself, but maybe you can pick up a thing or two just on how I work and what's going through my head. So this time I'm starting everything from scratch. Here we have a sphere, we have an HDR, and I've plugged in an HDR from my library, and then we also have this material right here. And that's it. I've also set up the material in this section. If we go to the Redshift render view, let's press play. And we have, as you can imagine, an amazing sphere. I'm going to transform the HDR so that we have our lights maybe right around there for the time being. And now let's mess around with some different noises. So we'll say Maxon noise. Plug that into the surface and take a look at somewhere to start. It's really up to you what you want to start with here. Again, no rules. But I do think it would be kind of cool to try something like this fire right here. We can start off with these little patches of values and kind of just go from there, maybe distort them a little bit. So let's go say fire right there. And I'm going to change the scale to about 2. So we have that going on. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of contrast. Set our space here to linear so that we can see what's going on. And then let's turn up these octaves. And I think that's good for the time being. Maybe turn down the contrast. Okay, let's make another noise. Plug that in. And if we keep with the whole fire theme, maybe we can do something cool with that. So we'll do fire, but we'll just change the offset so we have a different version of that. And then maybe the scale can go to 3. Let's go to the input of the original noise and see what happens when we do something in the offset. Okay, so not too much yet. What about the scale? Okay, get rid of that in the offset. The scale's kind of weird. So what if we did this? Because right now things are scaling to 0. That's why we have this big old white patch. So we can do a color range right there. And we can change this so that it's scaling, let's say, from 0.25 to 2, like that. Okay, we're starting to get this kind of thing, which is interesting. What if we turned down the contrast and made that happen everywhere a little bit more? So actually we have that going on. If we take our high clip, we can kind of adjust that a little bit. We have our low clip right there. I kind of like what's happening in general, but I think it's also nice to layer on another one on top of this. So let's make another noise. And as I do this, let's just go like that. There we go. Much better. And we're going to layer this on. So RS color layer. And we'll set this before the range. So we'll go right there, layer 1, plug that in. Let's now do something else. Let's see. We can do this rigid multifractal. It's kind of cool. So let's say rigid multifractal. And I like what's happening there. If we plug this into the surface, we can see what we're doing a bit more easily. I think that's pretty neat, but I want to bring the contrast back up, and I also want to make sure that the whites can actually have a chance at clipping like that. Okay, I think that's much better already. Let's plug this back in. There we go. Now we have that kind of thing going on. I like this whole liquid thing. Before I had those mechanical looking spheres, but for this one, let's start going with this weird ink droplet look. I think that'll be really cool. So I think that's kind of where this is heading right now. And again, I didn't plan any of this out ahead of time. I'm just improvising here. Whenever you're working artistically, you need to really be adaptive to whatever's happening, right? You can't just show up with the plan already in mind and expect everything to go according to that plan. A lot of times it's just something that you need to react to as you work. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm noticing that this is turning into this cool little swirly thing, and so I'm reacting to it by making this more of a featured thing to emphasize. So let's go maybe 7 right there. I think that's pretty cool. Let's see what that looks like when we set that in the displacement. So RS displacement, we'll go right there. Let's set this up with the surface now. So we have that, back to sRGB. Turn off the IPR, we'll go displacement, object, spacebar F to frame, and then I'll go here, tessellation, displacement, enable that, and that. Set the minimum edge length here to 3, and if I press play, it's probably going to be too much. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So instead, let's just set this to 0.01 to start, and then bring this up, 0.1. Okay, maybe 0.05. Go halfway. And this actually looks like one of our other noises, believe it or not. This looks like, well, kind of, you can see this pattern coming through quite a bit. But yeah, it's kind of like this over right here too, which is kind of interesting. But now that we have that, let's try to keep things going. One thing as well is that whenever you're working artistically like this, never try to really work backwards. Always try to push yourself forward. If you try to fix these mistakes that you've made or things that you think are mistakes, it's just going to eventually hinder you. And so it's better to just keep the flow going, even if you don't like it yet. Let's change the color range here so that we are displacing negatively as well. So we'll say -1, -1. There we go. Now we're cutting into the sphere. And you know, one thing we can also do here is we can go and limit how much this displaces away from the surface, and we can cut off some of these spiky regions around here. So let's say this, a maximum displacement of 0.5, 0.2, 0.1, 0.05, 0.01. There we go. So something like that, I think, is already looking a little bit better. Okay, so we're kind of going with this whole ink drop thing. That's cool. Let's go ahead and unplug that. But we have way too much contrast happening right now, and I don't really like that. Let's also go ahead and, let's see. Let's go ahead and turn down the contrast on some of this stuff. So turn the contrast down here a little bit, and then maybe instead of doing a fire, we can do something else. Maybe this Naki, or there we go, some of these guys, just to fill in those values. The sphere is just feeling way too uniform. So I kind of like it when we do maybe this noise. Let's see what that looks like. We can go to the displacement, plug this back in. Yeah, I think that's really cool. It kind of has this thick, viscous thing going on, right? Okay, so we have that. What else can we do to make this interesting? We could probably go through here and maybe combine that. What if we had like a mod noise or a cell noise that just kind of shows up every now and then? Even better, the cell Voronoi. Almost like there's some mechanical form trying to push against this ink. It's kind of a weird thought. By the way, if you're doing these artistic things, weird thoughts like that really kind of give you ideas and interesting angles to come from. So if you're making these things up, it's okay to allow your mind to jump into whatever's happening and just make things up. That's a big part of what drives inspiration as you work. So the cell Voronoi right here, let's go ahead and create another Maxon noise, plug that into the surface right here, and we'll say cell Voronoi, and then turn down the scale, maybe kind of like that. Okay, so here's the idea. The idea is that I want this Voronoi to change over time. And if we go here to the speed, right now it's at 0, let's set that to 1. And as you can see, this kind of morphs over time like this, which is pretty cool in general. I actually want this to be a little bit more specific on the edges. So maybe we can do like a Voronoi 2, take up the exponent so that it becomes more square. And then we can go here to the contrast and turn that up. Okay, so I don't want these shapes right here influencing all areas of the sphere all at once. I want only some of these cells to show up every now and then. So perhaps one way I can do this is, yeah, let's actually do a cell noise like that. I think that'll be fine. Perhaps one way to do this is we basically only allow these cells to come through if they are of a certain value. So let's say that we can cut off all values that are less than 0.7. So we'll say a low clip of 0.75. And that's probably a bit too much, 0.5. There we go. So now we end up with something like this. And the cool thing about that is now only certain areas are going to show through. For the speed, let's set that to 2. Oh, and I know the reason why that looks all jagged like that is because we're still displacing. I just figured that out. But anyway, these cells only show up every now and then. So now if we go ahead and we try to add this in to our displacement, so let's go ahead and do a color layer. We'll uncheck that IPR. We'll use this as our base right there. And we'll bring in those Voronoi cells. And let's set this up now like that. And we add in these values. So I just said add. Let's see what that might do once we hit play again and set this up. Okay, so you can kind of see it's sort of pushing around there. I'm not liking it. One of the reasons why is because we are chopping this off with this guy. So let's not do that anymore. Let's set this just to 1. Okay, and you can kind of see it coming through up there. We're not getting enough tessellation, it looks like. So we'll need to probably take down this edge length. Let's say maybe a value of 2. There we go. That really kind of smoothens it out a little bit. We can do something like that. Maybe we can go ahead and also take up the high clip. So that's, yeah, that's kind of more of what I was thinking. Like something that just kind of allows this smooth form to show up every now and then. That'll be really cool. Kind of like punches through the inky surface. I like that. Okay, so we have that going on. It's still very tessellated, and that's okay. We'll fix that later. We'll worry about the technical stuff later. But for right now, just make sure that you have enough octaves on that. And let's go ahead and see what this looks like when we turn the edge length here to something like 1. So we really subdivide this thing, and I can set the maximum subdivisions here to, let's say, 10.